Hey everybody, Dustin DePirac here.
Jeremy Price here.
Big Ten Media Day. This will be Price's first. I've been to a few of these rodeos. We've done the whole, run around in circles and talk to a whole bunch of people thing. But anyway, the obvious news of the day, not that you're surprised or didn't see it coming, but Indiana is your preseason favorite in the Big Ten, as they're the preseason favorite in the country, so of course this stands to reason. Cody Zeller, of course, also preseason Big Ten Player of the Year, which doesn't surprise anybody, but it was an interesting day to be at Big Ten Media Day the last few years. I mean, Indiana is always a topic of discussion. They're not somebody that gets ignored. There's, a lot of other teams, when they're lowly ranked, they basically just don't draw a crowd. Even when Indiana was lowly ranked, there was this discussion of, how you got there and how do you get it back and all those sorts of things. And Tom Crean has always dealt with a pretty big throng of reporters, regardless of the situation his team has been in, just because it's Indiana. But this year was a little bit different. There was definitely much bigger crowds surrounding him. There was just an absolute throng of people that surrounded Cody Zeller. And I think the more interesting thing was a lot of people got asked about Indiana.
Yeah, that was the thing. The Indiana wasn't just the topic of discussion with Indiana. Indiana was the topic of discussion with everybody else as well.
Yeah. No, very much so. I think the guy who was most shocked who had to deal with it, Matt Painter from Purdue, who got asked the question like, "How about them Hoosiers?" And it wasn't quite that, but it wasn't that homerish. But it was somebody just asked him, "What's the view of Purdue?" A review of Indiana from Purdue, and Painter basically had, what else could you do but go up there and just say, "Well, they've obviously accomplished all this," and I think he was at least classy about it. He said, you have to say that everything that they have, they've earned, more or less based on what they've gone through, obviously where Indiana was 4 years ago, with a 6-25 team, and coming off the sanctions and off of Kelvin Sampson and off of the roster demolition that occurred during that period. So, but Painter was pretty gracious about that, and some other guys were too. It seemed like you could definitely tell that there's a lot of respect for what Tom Crean's accomplished.
Yeah, his response was appropriate. I thought, not only was it classy, but it was appropriate. It was, it certainly wasn't going to benefit him to bemoan his own situation or something, or come off with sour grapes or anything like that. And I thought he was honest and gave a good answer.
And Purdue doesn't have a bad situation, don't forget. I mean, they obviously lost a lot between the last 2 years. There's losing Robbie Hummel now. We finally graduated, after the knee injuries and everything like that. And, obviously, a couple years ago having lost Juwan Johnson and Etuan Moore. But they've got a team over there. Tyrone Johnson's pretty good. And they also got his little brother, Ronnie. And you didn't mess with those guys in North Central, and I don't think you mess with them now.
And if we learned nothing else over the years about Purdue, it's don't underestimate them. I mean, you look at the team and you might not think...
They got a nice little freshman class. We've seen some of these guys. I mean, A.J. Hammond is a big, huge, wide post guy. He can play. Jay Simpson can play. I don't know if he's hurt or what, but regardless, not to spend too much time on Purdue. They're not going to get crushed. But, more or less, I think both of us spent the vast majority of our time dealing with, just talking to Indiana guys and stuff like that. I'm trying to do a Cody Zeller feature and trying to write something that someone hasn't written, and I have no idea how that's going to happen. But basically, just from talking to Crean, talking to the guys, what struck you, I guess? What was kind of the most interesting thing you heard today?
Most interesting thing. I don't know. It's just kind of the whole approach, and, it wasn't anything that we weren't used to, the whole expectations. What about the pressure? What about the depth and so on and so forth? Those were all the questions we're used to, but, they were asked in a myriad of ways
people.
From different people.
And that's the thing. I guess there's one thing that's interesting about Big Ten Media Day in terms of just watching what Crean says. In a lot of cases, he's said things that we've heard before, but he's being asked from different people, and I guess a lot of people who haven't heard the same answer 1,000 times and are trying to phrase it different ways or maybe come out of it in a decent direction or a different direction than we do. And a lot of the refrains were the same. I thought, Crean mostly said, and he has the point here that. More or less, have they dealt with this exactly before? No, but what's really the difference between this and having no one expect you to do anything, and really being told that you're not any good and that you don't belong in the top half of the Big Ten, as opposed to now when everybody sort of expects you to win all the time. And he said, I think that they weren't fazed by that. I don't think they'll be fazed by this. I don't think this will change really much of anything. I think there's some level maybe of naivety to that, but I don't think it's almost a naivety that you kind of have to have to a certain extent. I mean, I don't think you can sort of over predict what's going to happen or over discuss the possible pitfalls of what goes on here. You just kind of have to go through it. I think everybody probably says the same thing. That is preseason number one at the beginning of this thing. You don't say you don't prepare for what might happen in January or February or March or whatever. You just say what you can to get off the podium, and then you go back to work, more or less.
And Indiana's in a little different situation than like a Michigan State that's won it before and
Right.
been there. I mean, for Indiana, there's still that motivation out there that we haven't won it yet. There's still something to win. There's something to accomplish that didn't get accomplished last year. As good as last year was, they didn't win.
There's a lot missing. Yeah, I mean they weren't a Big Ten champion. They finished fifth in the league. There's a lot of teams that go to a Sweet. That doesn't make any sense. I was going to say there's a lot of teams that have gone to a Sweet 16. I mean, but that's true. And a lot of programs have seen that. In some way, shape, or form over that many years, over so many years, over so many cycles. A lot of programs, big and small, have made their way to the Sweet 16. There's a different ballgame of taking it to the next level of surviving that second weekend. So I mean, there can't be, I guess, too much of a feeling of accomplishment, in that regard, to the degree that you mean that. But yeah, there definitely is. I mean, there's obviously still a lot of hunger left, and there has to be. I guess I'm interested when it comes to how this team is going to eventually play out. I'm very interested in what's going to happen the first time they lose a game, because I think right now they're used to exceeding everyone's expectations, and I think when you're preseason number one, you might feel like the expectation is almost undefeated because anybody you're playing, you're expected to be better than. Because they weren't ranked as high as you, no matter who it was. Even if you weren't, no one. I don't think anyone looks at this team as a lock to win a national championship. I think every team looks at the best possibility from a field of mostly evens. But in the same sense, when you're the one that they pick out of everybody else, I think there's a potential to feel like when you lose, you're disappointing someone. You're not necessarily letting someone down, but you're failing to meet everyone's expectations. And I think the first time they do that, I think that's going to be the biggest issue that they have to deal with.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting when you were talking to Tom Izzo today. Mentioned that he doesn't mind an early loss. As a matter of fact, that was part of the reason he likes a tough schedule to kind of get that loss out of the way.
Yeah, that's actually what he said. He said, he says, you know what? You schedule the best teams you can so that you get your ears kicked in. He says because you don't want to deal with that undefeated thing. He says you want to get that over with as soon as you can. He says it's almost the best thing that you can have is to get trounced, and then nobody expects you to win it. And then all of a sudden you get underrated. And a lot of Michigan State teams have done that. I mean, he's done that a number of times. There's been a number of Final Four teams that after November they were like, what's wrong with Michigan State? So he makes an interesting point there. And obviously Tom Crean didn't necessarily take that tack when it's come to scheduling. And I don't mean that to crack on him. I mean, Carolina's on this schedule. When UCLA is on the schedule, so you can't act like they're not playing anybody. I mean, they're playing somebody. I don't think there's certainly not the depth of schedule that Izzo's Michigan State teams used to play. But there are guys on there that can beat you. They didn't take it entirely easy. I think they thought it would be harder. I think they thought they'd play UCLA and Georgetown in Brooklyn. They're playing UCLA and either UCLA or Georgetown and Georgia. Yeah. But there's a Butler and stuff like that. But at the very least, I mean, they are getting a Carolina team that's going to be pretty good.
Yeah.
But
I think Butler's going to be pretty good too.
Butler's going to be good, and they're going to be solid. They're going to be a third or fourth place Atlantic 10 team, I think. I don't know that they run away with that league. But a couple news items we kind of got to hit. We talked to Derek Elston today. Obviously, a story broke last night that he had torn his meniscus and is out probably a month or two. He kind of discussed the story today, said that it had been bothering him a little bit before Hoosier Hysteria, and he got out there, and he just couldn't play on it. He kind of took himself out of it. He said there wasn't anything that necessarily happened. He just started feeling a little bit of pain. He says nobody ran into him, nothing really happened, but he just started to feel bad. And he's had bad knees for a long time, so he just talked to Tim Garl and said, hey, can you check this out? And they were like, seems okay, give it a shot. And then after Hoosier Hysteria, it really swelled up on him when he tried to practice again, so they got it looked at, and that was torn meniscus. They haven't given him necessarily a timetable, but it sounds like that's about your general thing is about 4 to 8. So that's going to be interesting to see what they do with that, because it's going to require a lot from Hana Perea and Peter Jerkin. Perea is also hurt. He's had the foot thing for a while. I'm not sure when he's getting back. And I also posed a question to Tom Crean about their status in terms of eligibility, clearinghouse, stuff like that. Obviously, saw a couple years ago that Guy-Marc Michel was denied his eligibility, having played for a French professional team a couple years ago. I just asked, hey, out of the blue, hey, is there anything there? Are those guys been cleared yet? Is that a done deal? And Crean gave me pretty much a non-answer. I guess is the best way to put it. He just said, the thing we've been dealing with them is, the thing we're still dealing with them, and it was very vague, and it didn't really say anything, and it very much suggested that, well, it can't be a done deal, basically. I mean, I don't imagine they have, final clearinghouse papers at this point. I'm not exactly sure how that entire process works, but it sounds like there's something still interesting there, and not sure what that is, and don't want to over-speculate on what that could be, if that means that they won't play or whatever, but one way or another, it's still a thing, I guess is the thing. I guess is the issue.
And sometimes those things take some time. I'm
They
not
do.
sure there are not a few other freshmen out there still kind of waiting to hear on some things too.
Sure.
So-
I mean, there's some of them are more public than others. A lot of cases, it's more of an eligibility. Did you get paid? Did you not issue? Sort of thing. I mean, Shabazz Muhammad and Kyle Anderson are still dealing with stuff over at UCLA. But I don't know when that's going to get taken care of. So that's going to be an interesting kind of story to follow and find out exactly what's there.
But regardless of how that plays out with the injuries,
Yeah.
it kind of leaves the
Those
door
guys
wide
need to play.
open
Yeah.
At that 4 spot, which
4 and 5, yeah. I mean, because Derek is really your backup 5 more than anything else, as much as Jerkin is. So that's an issue they're going to have to deal with. I mean, that costs you some depth early on, and that's something that matters. So anyway, we got to cut this one off and get rolling because the janitor's going to kick us out of here real fast. All right, thanks, guys.